The unexpected moment that turned my family upside down. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. My father's voice comes to me as a whisper that doesn't match the man who dominated rooms. "Evan, you have to help me," he says, breath fogging the window of my small apartment as November wind presses through the drafty frame. I'm still wearing my EMT jacket. There's a red smear on the cuff from a nosebleed. Not my father's, some kid at the bus stop who fainted in the cold. He hated this jacket. He hated that I chose it when, in his words, I could have run something real. Richard Stanton built a skyline from glass and borrowed reputation. That's what Aunt May says, and she knew him before the tailored suits. He taught us that image isn't everything, it's the only thing. Growing up, I learned to count the seconds between his praises for Lena and his pointed jokes about me. My job is the thing I chose that he didn't. It's also the one thing I can't fake. People either make it to county or they don't. No sponsorships, no ribbon cuttings. "They're moving on me," he says now. "Banks. Some people you don't want as enemies." He isn't dramatic by accident. Drama is a tool. I set water on the heater because my hands shake when I'm hungry. This is the first time he has stepped inside my place. He looks at the thrift store table like it's contagious. On my fridge is a magnet that says do the next right thing. The next right thing is coffee. I ask what he needs. He says liquidity, as if cash is air and I hoard oxygen. I tell him EMTs don't stabilize billion-dollar nosebleeds. He stares like I'm joking. He says the word family like a password I changed without asking permission. He says the word duty like an invoice finally due. What I stand to lose is simple. My sanity, my savings, my apartment, the one thing I built without him. What I stand to gain is less clear. A seat at a table I left, or maybe a chance to prove the thing he mocks keeps people alive. On my counter sits a sealed envelope from the county courthouse addressed to him, hand-delivered during my last shift. I picked it up because the processor recognized my name and smirked. I have not opened it. Coffee hisses, his phone buzzes. My heart recalibrates its beat to a siren I can't yet hear. Then Richard whispers a number that makes my walls feel suddenly thinner. I didn't become an EMT to spite my father. I became an EMT because Mrs. Alvarez died in our kitchen when I was 12, and the men and women who showed up moved like they rehearsed the impossible. They spoke softly and honestly to my mother. They worked hard and lost, and still they cleaned the table before leaving. Aunt May says the kindness saved the rest of the day. Richard arrived later, smelling like cedar and applause. He patted my shoulder and told me to think long-term. Long-term, to Richard, meant measurable prestige and quarterly returns on affection. At 14, I learned how to turn Nick's busted asthma inhaler into a temporary spacer using a water bottle we cut with keys. At 16, I got certified in basic life support because the community center needed teenagers who wouldn't panic. At 18, I enlisted in humility, internships that paid in burritos and rides home. Richard called these hobbies, then upgraded to phase when I kept going. Lena, 3 years older and fluent in compliments, learned how to redirect storms. She'd loop her hand in his arm and say, "Dad, Evan's good under pressure," as if I were a promising napkin holder. The last Thanksgiving before everything tilted, Richard had looked across his 12-seat table and said, "We all make choices. Some of us choose ceilings we can touch." Laughter bubbled. I tasted copper and said nothing. After dessert, he handed me a check for $500 with "for gas" in the memo line. I kept it because rent was due. I kept it because pride doesn't keep lights on. 3 weeks ago, outside a ribbon cutting for his newest tower, he introduced me to donors as my son, the ambulance hobbyist. I said, "EMT." He said, "Temporary." I said nothing else, because sirens don't negotiate with microphones. He leaned in as the photographer adjusted his lens and said the word that has never stopped echoing since: disappear. He meant from investors who Google, from stories that don't end in champagne, from the frame he curated. That night, I promised myself my absence would cost him something real. The first red flag wasn't the envelope. It was the way Richard watched it. His eyes kept returning to my counter, as if the paper had teeth. The second came when a lien notice arrived at my station addressed to a shell name I recognized from plaques in his foyer: Anson Ridge Holdings, LLC. The envelope was thin but heavy with implication. Our dispatcher, Tasha, Joke that billionaires don't lick stamps, but she slid it to me because of the name. I took a picture and texted Lena. Everything okay? She responded with confetti emojis and, Dad says hi. Then came the calls. I don't know how men with perfect suits develop the talent for sounding both casual and urgent, but strangers started asking me to confirm forwarding addresses for Mr. Stanton's office. I said I didn't work there, and they said of course, but could I pass along a message about an upcoming maturity date? I told one caller that I wasn't my father's secretary. He laughed and said, No, you're his insurance. Richard maintained his ritualized swagger. Instagram-worthy lunches. Golf. A press quote about resilience in a volatile market. Meanwhile, a guy I know in building inspections mentioned sudden layoffs at one of Richard's property managers. The receptionist who has known me since braces wouldn't meet my eyes when I went by to leave Aunt May a bundt cake. A poster came down in the lobby. A plaque went missing. The ficus plants looked thirsty. I told myself it wasn't my problem. People like him always find weatherproof money. People like me learn to pack a go bag. But doubt leaked in like the wind through my window. The courthouse envelope sat on my counter and pulsed like a low-grade fever. When I finally slid a finger beneath the seal, the paper rasped like a throat clearing before it a hard truth. It was a summons and notice of default, stamped in a clean blue that felt colder than winter. I read the first page twice, then a third time aloud to silence my own chest. The amount due could have bought my building twice, roof to basement. 2 nights later, Richard's Foundation hosted a gala in a glass atrium that reflected a city trying to forgive itself for being expensive. Aunt May asked me to go because Lena texted she was handling seating drama, which usually meant dodging donors' hands. I wore my least wrinkled suit and parked 3 blocks away to avoid valet fees. Inside, a string quartet sawed through a pop song. Bowls of sea salt almonds looked like props. Richard spotted me and grinned as if we were co-conspirators. Look who made parole, he said into my ear. Lena air-kissed my cheek and mouth. Thank you. I said I was leaving after dessert. During the auction, the host asked people to stand if they had a frontline hero in their family. Richard rose theatrically, placed a hand on my shoulder, and told a story about how he let me pursue my passion, as though my life were a pilot program he greenlit. Laughter, applause, lights. I stood there like a centerpiece. After, near a sculpture of a bird too heavy to fly, he said, You'd have been a killer closer if you'd listened. I said, Closer to what? He said, Power. I said, People. He smirked. A man in a navy suit approached with papers clipped like a jaw. Mr. Stanton? Richard's face didn't move, but his hand tightened around his bourbon. The process server, the man said, and the atrium's noise bent away from us. Richard tried to pivot, but the man was trained on refusal. The envelope changed hands. Lena's bracelet chimed like tiny bells. People pretended not to look. I looked enough for all of us. On my way out, a security guard I'd treated for heat exhaustion last summer whispered, Careful, man. Some sharks smell blood different. I drove home with the summons in my glove box, and the gala's laughter lodged behind my ribs. Back in my apartment, the fridge hummed as if thinking. I opened the courthouse envelope again, traced the dates, estimated the hole. That's when Richard texted, Come tomorrow, or don't come back at all. I went, because exile sounds brave until it means leaving your sister alone. Richard met me at the mansion door in gym clothes he never sweated in. He waved toward the lake like he owned the moon on it. You don't bring trouble to my events, he said, as if process servers RSVP to me first. I told him he'd brought his own trouble. He said, Disappear means disappear. I said, You came to my apartment. He said, Desperation edits vocabulary. Lena stood in the hall wringing a napkin into lace. It's temporary, she said, like a spell. Dad just needs bridge financing. And then everyone chills. She is good at summarizing fantasies. She followed me to the patio. Please don't provoke him, she whispered. There's a buyer for the tower if we can hold out. I asked who we was. She blinked like I'd switched languages. Aunt May arrived with a casserole and a stare that saw through drywall. She hugged me first and harder. Inside the kitchen, she said, Your mother used to label leftovers with dates. Nothing spoiled under her roof. She looked around the marble cold enough to store bodies. This house smells like nothing, she said, and set the dish down. Richard called us to the dining room, but there was no dinner, just papers. Sign these, he told me, sliding indemnities and guarantees like coasters. A show of confidence, he said. We present a united front. I told him I wanted my own counsel. He laughed like I'd told a joke about weather. Aunt May said, let him read. Richard said, he reads ambulance forms. I said, they decide who lives. His jaw worked. He said, disappear. Aunt May put a hand on my shoulder. I folded the pen back to him and stood. I have slept on floors. I can sleep on dignity. I packed a duffel with the things I could carry without missing later. Spare scrubs, the photo of Mom at the lake, the medal from a marathon I finished in the rain. I left the framed check in a drawer, a relic of earlier humiliations. On my way out, Lena pressed a key into my palm and whispered, for emergencies. I told her emergencies were my full-time job. She said, then treat us like a patient, and I didn't know whether to laugh or pray. Richard pointed to the door and said, leave, or you're not my son. The day after my banishment, I found the first tangible clue hiding in ordinary mess. At the station, we'd run a call on a fender bender near Harbor and 9th. After we transferred the patient, I ducked into the coffee shop on the corner where the owner keeps a corkboard of lost keys and dog photos. Between a karate flyer and a piano tutor's tab, a pale blue envelope dangled by a pushpin, addressed to R. Stanton, care of an email I'd never seen. Stanton. Alt at Proton Mail. The barista said a courier had left it for pickup. He said the gentleman missed him by 5 minutes, she added, rolling her eyes. I offered to deliver it, and she shrugged. I bought 2 drip coffees and paid for the envelope with a tip. In the rig, I held it up to the light. Inside, a single-page notice of default from a small lender I only knew from payday loan storefronts, Lake and Arrow Finance, referencing a commercial bridge note at 17.9% APR. The signature block contained a name I didn't recognize, Sentinel Sable Advisors, as guarantor of last resort. My stomach ticked like a metronome. I Googled nothing. I wrote it all down. Dates, loan number, the P.O. box where payments were due. I called Aunt May from behind the bay. Don't chase it alone, she said. But don't ignore that smell either. I didn't tell Lena. Instead, after shift, I drove past Richard's office tower, steel ribs, mirrored skin, the illusion of infinite sky. The lobby directory had been temporarily removed from maintenance. The concierge pretended not to see me. I saw a cleaning cart stacked with leather-bound annual reports with the covers torn off. I pocketed one to study the weight of lies. At home, I tried the burner email listed on the envelope with a blank test message. It bounced back, account disabled. But the footer of the default notice showed an alias ID for encrypted attachments. I recognized the pattern. We used a similar format at the hospital for transporting sensitive reports. Not the same service, but the same thesis, hide and protocol. I pulled a shoebox of my mother's old papers from my closet, hunting for business cards Richard had left around like calling cards. In the bottom, taped to a faded warranty for a refrigerator, I found a black Nokia candy bar phone. Dead battery, ancient charger in the same box, a patient man's jackpot. I plugged it in and watched the past blink awake. The phone booted to a message preview. Sentinel Sable wire failed. Call me now. Burner phones are little museums of intention. This one was scuffed and ugly, the way guilt hides from photographs. When it finished booting, the text thread at the top wasn't a family chat. It was a ledger. Dates, amounts, balances due. The contact names were not names. LNA desk, floor, Pine 6, Carterell. I clicked the last, expecting a lawyer, and found a single message from 6 months earlier. Your client has misrepresented his liquidity to the bank. We decline. It ended with a number I recognized from a plaque at the courthouse, Carter's office. I breathed out slowly and scrolled. Timestamps testified against Richard's dinner table stories. On the night, he'd posted a photo from a charity poker tournament. Him laughing, chips piled like a sandcastle. A series of messages showed cash advances from 3 different accounts within 60 minutes, with fees that looked like punishments. Another thread contained voice notes labeled IOU confirmation, with numbers that added up to demolition. I called Carter's receptionist and left my name. No specifics, just an ask for 10 minutes to clarify a document. Then I drove to Crescent Bank, where I'd opened my first checking account. The same manager, Mr. Ortiz, still kept a photo of his kid's graduation on the desk. I asked general questions about what a guarantor of last resort was. He said it was either a life raft or an anchor, depending on the storm. He walked me through the public parts. UCC filings anyone could search, liens attached to corporate entities. He didn't break rules. He taught me how to read the map. I went home and searched. 3 filings in 2 months. One was against Anson Ridge Holdings. Another against a shell I'd never heard of, Salt Glass LLC. The third hit a trust that mentioned Lena by her full name. That one felt like an elevator dropping. I called Lena immediately. She didn't pick up. I texted, "Are you a trustee on Salt Glass?" Minutes passed. "No idea what that is," she finally replied. "Everything's fine, Dad's handling it." Fine as a rope they hand you right before the trapdoor opens. Carter's assistant returned my call and said, "Can you come in tomorrow alone?" Carter's office smelled like paper and lemon oil, the way consequences sometimes do. He met me in the conference room, where the table had faint scratches from battles past. He didn't offer sympathy. He offered a pen. "Write what you think you know," he said, sliding over a legal pad. I wrote, default notices, shell names, Lake and Arrow, Sentinel Sable, Salt Glass LLC, trust mention with Lena's full name. He read without interrupting, tapping the pad when my pen hovered. "Okay," he said finally. "What he's hiding is not subtle. It's a lattice." He explained 3 things. First, a set of offshore shells, likely in the Caribbean, where money took vacations without returning postcards. Second, gambling markers from a private room in a casino 2 states over, written against anticipated distributions from the tower sale. Third, and most immediate, forged personal guarantees, signatures traced from old PDFs, used to shore up bridge loans when real collateral thinned. I felt the room tilt. He'd risk Lena's trust? I asked. "He already did," Carter said, sliding a photocopy of a notarized page with a stamp I recognized from the notary in Richard's lobby. The notary's commission had expired 2 years earlier. "Why?" I asked. Carter shrugged a lawyer's shrug. "Ego is efficient," he said. "Addiction is faster." "This is criminal," I said. "Some of it is," he said. "Some of it is merely ruinous." He recommended I get documents the old-fashioned way, from people who kept them to protect themselves. Ex-assistants, he said. Vendors who were stiffed. Junior bankers with wounded pride. I drove to a strip mall where Richard's last assistant, Priya, had opened a tax prep kiosk. She looked at me like a ghost of W-2's past, then laughed without warmth. "He's still telling people debt is a mindset." She handed me a manila folder as if it were a hot pan, emails where Richard dictated lies he'd later claim were typos. Also, a photo of a whiteboard from a war room showing circles around Lena beneficiary and Evan, no exposure. No exposure felt like a compliment and an insult in the same breath. I sat in my car and watched dusk climb the windows. A text from Lena arrived. "Dinner tonight? Dad insists." I typed and deleted, then typed again. I didn't want theater. I needed proof on stage. In Priya's folder, one email subject line read, "Salt Glass transfer executes Friday." Plans don't announce themselves as plans. They grow where panic leaves space. I spread Priya's emails across my table and arranged them by date, like laying out instruments before a hard call. First, the bank statements. Recurring cash advances in increments just under reporting thresholds, all within city limits. Second, the burner addresses funneling PDF updates to a list of initials that formed a constellation of risk. Third, a recorded voicemail Priya had kept because Richard once told her to delete anything that sounds like a confession. She hadn't, because she wasn't foolish. I bought a spiral notebook and copied everything by hand. Dates, account numbers masked but recognizable, the times he was allegedly in meetings when his phone placed him at the casino hotel. I scheduled a meeting with Mr. Ortiz at Crescent to ask general questions about UCC releases. He agreed to explain the timing. I emailed Carter requesting a neutral location where documents could be displayed without theatrics. He proposed a mediation room at the courthouse annex, glass walls, camera, witness chairs. "You'll need someone Richard still thinks he can win," Carter wrote. "Invite Lena." The moral dilemma grew teeth around midnight. My father's plea still fogged my window. My job still required clean conscience. If I helped him privately, I might save the properties and lose my own boundaries. If I exposed him, I might shatter Lena's orbit and salt the ground. Aunt May answered when I called. Accountability isn't cruelty, she said. But decide what help looks like in writing, not tears. I printed 3 packets, a summary for law enforcement if needed, a version for the bank with strictly public filings, and one for Lena with things she deserved to see first. I recorded a short message into my phone describing why I was doing this, in case everything went sideways and someone needed the truth without my edits. Then I texted Lena. Dinner, yes. Please bring your calendar tomorrow morning at 9. She replied with a heart and a question mark. I replied with the address of the annex and nothing else. I slept 2 hours and dreamed of sirens that didn't move because no one cleared the way. I woke up already running. Richard called at dawn and said, "Cancel everything, or you'll regret tomorrow." Dinner was a performance with a familiar director. Richard chose a restaurant where the host greets him by last name and the booths are deep enough to bury intentions. Lena arrived early, face bright with resolve and fear. Aunt May texted she'd be nearby in case I needed extraction. I set my phone to record in my pocket. Habit, not paranoia. Richard opened with charm the way surgeons open with antiseptic, necessary for the cut to land clean. "You look tired," he said, eyes telegraphing concern to the waiter. "Work eating you again?" "Eating is a privilege at work," I said. He laughed and praised public service as if reading a brochure. Then he leaned in. "About this annex idea," he said softly. "You will not parade family matters before strangers." "Then fix family matters," I said. Lena flinched. He turned to her with the paternal smile he'd patented for photographers. "Honey, he doesn't understand that markets turn," he said. "Smart families consolidate and weather the season." "By forging signatures?" I asked. The smile cracked. The waiter arrived with bread that tasted like staged comfort. Richard tried guilt next. Stories about my childhood shoes, about school trips he funded, about Lena's tuition. He forgot to mention my mother's second job or Aunt May's rent money when the market turned during flu seasons. He said being a father is expensive courage. I said courage doesn't borrow at 17. 9% under a fake guarantee. His eyes went flat. "You're picking enemies," he said. "You don't know these people." I said I knew the numbers. I said I invited Lena because I want her to hear truth once. Lena's hand trembled around her water. "Dad, just show us your plan," she said. He lifted his napkin and smiled at the room, not at us. "My plan is my plan," he said. He slid an envelope across the table. Inside, a drafted NDA asking me to forego defamatory statements in exchange for a stipend. I pushed it back with one finger. "I don't sell quiet," I said. "Everyone sells something," he said, and the booth felt suddenly smaller. Under the table, Lena texted me. "I'm scared. Don't leave me alone." At 9 sharp, Carter unlocked the glass-walled mediation room at the courthouse annex. The place looked like a fishbowl where honesty and humiliation could be studied safely. On one side, a screen and a projector. On the other, for chairs and a carafe of water nobody drinks. Lena arrived first with sunglasses and a notebook dotted with nervous constellations. Aunt May waited outside on a bench, knitting something that looked like a boundary. I told Lena we would only show what we could verify. She nodded, jaw tight, and asked if Dad knew. I said he was invited. She said, "He'll turn it into theater," and I said, "We'll give him a stage he can't control." Richard arrived 12 minutes late with a smile he rents to judges and journalists. He wore the Navy suit that says responsible father and the watch that says I can buy a minute. He looked at the glass walls and laughed. "You couldn't book a private room?" he asked. "Transparency is cheaper," Carter said, entering behind him with a folder under his arm. "We'll keep this straightforward. You may leave at any time, but the record will not." Richard's smile paused as if buffering. He took a seat opposite me and drummed 2 fingers like a metronome set to denial. I laid out the plan, a step-by-step timeline using publicly accessible filings, previous emails with metadata intact, and screenshots from the burner phone, displayed without sensationalism. "We're not here to shame you," I said. "We're here to build an accurate picture so decisions stop being made in fog." Lena exhaled in a way that sounded like a new word. Carter set ground rules. No interruptions during each segment, questions after. Richard nodded and asked for coffee. No one moved. We started with Anson Ridge and moved to Salt Glass LLC. When the trust document with Lena's name appeared, She leaned forward. Carter pointed to the notary stamp and its expiration date. "This is void," he said. "Any bank relying on it will have a problem later." Richard said, calmly, "We'll re-execute." Carter said, "After the fact isn't execute, it's confess." I played Priya's saved voicemail. Richard's voice, impatient and clipped. "Delete the last draft. Send the version with my signature scan." Lena closed her eyes like bracing for a crash. "Dad?" she whispered. He began the pivot to charm, but the glass reflected only shape, not spin. Carter cued the final slide. Wire instructions to Sentinel Sable with a red, failed timestamp matched to a casino weekend. Richard's jaw tightened. The metronome stopped. "You don't know who you're exposing," he said softly. "You don't know their reach." Aunt May opened the door and said, "Then maybe they should see this." Aunt May stepped inside with a weathered accordion folder, the kind that survives storms by refusing to look important. "Your mother kept receipts," she said, setting it on the table like a relic. "I kept copies. Inside were things I didn't know existed. Old notarized letters with clean stamps, original trust outlines, and a handwritten note from my mother, in case promises turn into puzzles. It included a simple flowchart she'd sketched in blue pen, showing assets, beneficiaries, and 2 boxes labeled "No Sign Authority." Lena's name was in one, mine in the other. The date predates all Richard's recent maneuvers. Carter compared signatures quickly, then slowly. Then with a magnifier he produced like a magic trick for reality. "These," he said, tapping Richard's recent guarantees, "do not match the originals. And this commission stamp is expired." Richard's smile collapsed into frankness. "I did what I had to," he said. "Markets turned. Partners lied." "Markets don't write your name wrong," Aunt May said. "Partners don't change the date on a dead stamp." The projector displayed a clean ledger Carter had reconstructed from filings, phone records, and Priya's emails. On the right-hand column, casino markers. On the left, loan draws. In the middle, transfers touching Sentinel Sable before bouncing back with insufficient. "The motive," Carter said, "is simple arithmetic. Ego needs fuel. When it runs out, people borrow fire." Richard turned on me then. "You think you're noble because you ride around saving strangers?" he said. "You don't know what it means to hold a city up. You don't know the enemies I keep at bay." "What enemies?" Lena asked, a new shape in her voice. He offered a list of faceless threats. He called them vultures, then partners, then friends. His mask didn't just slip. It fell, clattering into the carafe and making no sound. Carter clicked to one last slide. A notarized statement from Priya, time-stamped yesterday, swearing to the whiteboard photo and the directive to delete confessions. He had also queued a draft referral letter to the district attorney's office, blank names ready to receive signatures. "I'm done enabling," Lena said, voice steady. "Show us every account, or we proceed." Richard stood, breathing like a boxer in the wrong weight class. He reached for the folder. Carter's hand landed first. Outside the glass, 2 bank officers appeared, followed by a courthouse reporter. Consequences don't arrive with trumpets. They sign in at the front desk. The bank officers asked to review the public filings Carter had assembled and examine the trust documents Aunt May brought. Richard's voice found its confident register again, offering explanations shaped like fog. But fog doesn't hold signatures, and dates don't bend for charisma. One officer made a call, then another. Within an hour, a hold was placed on transfers involving Salt Glass LLC pending verification. By afternoon, a temporary restraining order prevented asset movements from the trust that included Lena's name. Richard demanded to know who authorized the circus. Carter showed him the statute numbers like street signs leading out of denial. At work, fallout arrived on my own phone. My supervisor asking why a reporter wanted a quote about my father. I said nothing on record. I took an extra shift on a night busier than sirens could manage. We pulled a teenager from an overdose spiral. We calmed an old man who'd lost his dog in winter. The city did not care about our family theater. It asked for hands, not headlines. Still, between calls, guilt gnawed like an animal pacing a small cage. I had triggered something I couldn't untrigger. I'd also kept Lena from signing her future away. Richard's friends split like a cell under stress. Some texted to warn me of dangerous optics. Others, quiet, tired people who process invoices and schedule meetings, sent screenshots and silent thumbs-ups. Priya's folder became a river. Carter's office started receiving calls from junior bankers suddenly eager to clarify ethics. Lena moved into Aunt May's guest room with an overnight bag and the courage of someone learning a new language mid-conversation. I paid a price too. An investor-friendly blog posted a grainy photo of me outside the annex, captioned, "Ambulance Son Torpedoes Deal." My captain pulled me aside. "Keep your head down," he said. "Patience comes first, drama comes last." I agreed. I went home to my small apartment and sat in the dark and felt the quiet measure my pulse. A text from an unknown number arrived. "You don't know Sentinel Sable. We collect." I forwarded it to Carter and blocked the number. I wrote the next steps on a single index card and slid it into my wallet. When panic tries to negotiate, paper refuses to improvise. The ritual kept me honest. Then someone rattled my doorknob twice, like a question waiting outside. I didn't open the door. I called the non-emergency line and logged the attempt. Then I called Aunt May, who arrived with 2 thermoses and the look of someone willing to camp on my floor. We slept in shifts, which is to say we told each other stories until the stories slept for us. In the morning, I booked a therapy appointment through the clinic network and told the truth in a room where truth could sit down. The therapist asked what help would look like if it didn't feel like betrayal. I said it would look like paperwork. She nodded, thrilled by boring answers. Carter drafted a formal assistance agreement with conditions. Richard would disclose all accounts, cease new borrowing, enter a monitored repayment plan, attend counseling for compulsive gambling, and sign a consent for third-party oversight. Any violation, and we would file the referral package. I felt mean and relieved writing it. Boundaries always look rude to the person who has benefited from their absence. Lena read the terms twice and added a clause. Any support funds provided by family would flow through a trust handled by an independent fiduciary. Aunt May added another. No contact with certain friends, whose names she wrote down from memory. They don't get to audition for reentry, she said. They get to wait in the lobby. Richard met us in Carter's office, smaller now, paler around the eyes. He signed the agreement because his alternatives had narrowed. He refused therapy until Lena said, softly, "I won't see you without it." He conceded, a careful word for a toppled wall. We set a schedule, weekly check-ins, bank statements delivered to the fiduciary, monthly reports to the court-appointed monitor the bank now required. Nothing heroic. Paperwork. Alarms that go off before flames reach the ceiling. I returned to routine with a different spine. I bought a better lock. I cooked in bulk and labeled the containers with dates like my mother used to. I finished my therapy intake and learned the difference between vigilance and fear. On a quiet Sunday, I ran the lake path past Richard's mansion and waved at the water like it owed me nothing. When I got home, an envelope waited. Mandatory appearance. Stanton versus Stanton. The hearing was procedural and strangely humane. The judge spoke like a teacher reminding adults to read their own homework. She affirmed the monitoring arrangement, praised the fiduciary structure, and warned that forged signatures make poor umbrellas. Richard stared at the table grain, then at Lena, then at me. He didn't apologize, he complied. Sometimes that's the best you get from men who worship weather. I walked out into a day so clear it felt rented. Aunt May linked her arm through mine and said, "Your mother would have packed sandwiches." We ate from a food truck instead, tacos wrapped like small victories. I kept thinking about my patients who never got the chance to renegotiate anything. How many families live in rooms full of secrets because pride hides where tenderness should stand guard? If you're watching this and your crisis wears a suit, start with the boring steps. Write down dates and amounts. Search public filings. Photograph documents with metadata visible. Save voicemails. Ask a neutral expert what words mean before someone sells you a definition. Decide what your help looks like on paper. Sign it. And if someone asks you to disappear, understand that disappearing people is a cost-cutting measure for bullies. I still wear the EMT jacket Richard hated. The cuff has a permanent stain the washer can't persuade. It reminds me that value isn't a number, it's a posture you take toward strangers. Lena visits our apartment now and brings flowers that somehow survive in weak light. Richard sends bank statements on time and shows up to meetings and leaves early, which is its own confession. We are not a movie ending. We are a safety plan printed on the fridge. On the lake path yesterday, the wind moved in one direction and didn't turn back. I think healing looks like that, steady, unglamorous, serviceable. If you're in the middle of a storm, pack your bag with proof, not wishes. Choose boundaries over applause. Choose the next right thing. I wrote the next steps on a single index card and slid it into my wallet. When panic tries to negotiate, paper refuses to improvise. The ritual kept me honest.